Welcome everyone. I'm Jim Ball. I'm the co-chair of Evangelicals for Biden, and I'm talking today with one of my very good friends, Rachel Lamb. Rachel is currently finishing up her PhD at the University of Maryland in College Park, Maryland. So Rachel, it's really great to be talking to you today about the upcoming election and how you're feeling about things in our country. But first, why don't you just help folks get to know you a little bit better and give us a little bit of sense of your journey, especially your faith journey.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Thanks for the opportunity to share more about my journey and specifically how I'm feeling and thinking about the upcoming election. So I do live here in Maryland. I've lived here for about 8 years, but before that, I actually was born and raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So I'm a Midwest girl, and when I lived in Michigan, I was part of my community was deeply embedded in my local church there. So growing up, I spent most of my Sundays and many of the other days of the week participating with a church where my dad was the first youth pastor, actually, and then the senior pastor. And it was in that context that I really learned more about what it meant to actually be a Christian, not just to say you are one, but to ask yourselves what it means to live that out in all areas of life. I had lots of extended sort of family there, if you will, lots of adopted grandmas and grandpas, aunts and uncles. And I think that Christian community was really foundational in helping me understand who I am, understanding what it means to love others, serve others. And it was part of that context that also helped me kind of ask, what it might look like for me to continue serving the Lord in whatever I went on to do in my, my work, my vocation, my studies. When I was about 6, I accepted the Lord as my Savior and was baptized when I was 12. And those are obviously really important key parts of my personal testimony. But those aren't the only pieces, of course, as we grow and we mature in understanding sort of more about the Bible, more about how it applies to the world we live in, and can continue to grow in our relationship with others. Our faith journey doesn't stop there. We continue to grow, and part of that growth journey for me especially was during college. I think this is probably true for many young people, but if you have a chance to go to school outside of your comfort zone, or at least away from home for the first time, and you're introduced to lots of different types of people, it really helps you sort of kind of press in against the things that you learned when you were younger that help you navigate some of those new ways of thinking, while also maybe challenging some of the ways that you thought about things before. So I went to school at Wheaton College in Chicago, which is a Christian liberal arts college. And it was a fantastic place for me to do that because I was in a context with lots of different Christians, many of whom were coming from evangelical backgrounds like myself. But there was just a lot of range of just faith traditions and backgrounds. And I think that was really beautiful because it really helped you appreciate the diversity of the church and kind of press in together. When I was there, I actually studied 2 things. I was really interested in environmental studies, and that's because when I was growing up with my family when I was younger, and when I spent so much time visiting America's beautiful national parks and camping and canoeing and spending a lot of times outdoors, and recognizing that this was just a beautiful world that the Lord created. And also at the same time being struck by the fact that even though we were made in the image of God and meant to protect and love the world he created as God would, we often weren't being good stewards of the world. Yeah. And so by both inheriting the fact that like the Psalm says, the earth is the Lord and all that's in it, and knowing that it belongs to him, and feeling the desire to do better around stewardship, I took that up as a major. But I was also increasingly conscious of the fact that creation care isn't just about the rest of the created order, but it's also about people. And so I was really interested in how we could find or identify sort of approaches that were both good for the environment and good for people. So I actually studied international relations, which is very similar to political science, although it does have a more sort of international development focus. And that really kind of started my love for thinking about how we can think about better policy approaches to how we care for the environment, specifically when we think of global emerging challenges like biodiversity loss, massive deforestation, and climate change, that we needed good ideas, good policy ideas matched with good science. And doing all of that was important as a Christian because it was clear, the mandate was clear, that we're supposed to care and protect the world that he gave us. But working that out in our contemporary context means, we need people who maintain those core values and are really focused on honoring the Lord and loving others, while using the best of our minds that the Lord gave us to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, that's so great. Well, pivoting now to our current moment, how are you feeling about the state of the country? How are you feeling about how things are going in our country?
Yeah, well, this will be the third presidential election I voted in. I believe that's right. And so particularly for me over the last 5 or so years, four years really, it's been a challenge because for most of those years, I've also been in my PhD program, spending so much time, like I mentioned before, thinking about how we can do better, for example, in stewarding our planet, thinking about how we can best tackle climate change, and trying to do it alongside peers, especially fellow Christians, for example, through some of the work that I've been able to do with Young Evangelicals for Climate Action and the Evangelical Environmental Network. That's so much good work, and joining in partnership with other Christians has been really meaningful. And so in that sense, I'm hopeful that some of the best of that work can continue to be utilized. But it's been also really challenging because particularly the political climate has been so hostile to thinking about solutions to those things. So instead of inviting dialogue about thinking about the best ways to approach those things, there's been a clear lack of leadership on that, and worse, no real engagement of the clear, scientific evidence, or the fact that those things are negatively impacting some of our most vulnerable communities now, and that those are serious things we should be engaged on at the highest levels, not just at city levels, which is important, or state levels where I work a lot, but also at the national level. So on one hand, it's hard to be so deeply engaged as a Christian in the work, and yet looking around and seeing a clear lack of leadership on that. So that's been real challenging. It's also been challenging because, of course, on a related note, our country's been really, challenged around this pandemic. It's been just so hard to see those people who have been so affected, those who have lost their lives, those who've lost family members. Everyone is really struggling to figure out, how do we do this? How do we love each other better in this time? How do we be safe? How do we move forward? And I've been really discouraged by the also lack of sort of cohesive narrative about that at the highest levels. The fact that seems to be a lack of willingness to include like scientific evidence, to defer to those, persons within the federal government that are charged with, leading that effort because of their expertise. Just a lot of people like me struggle sometimes to figure out, what is the best thing to do, because the information is just, it can be that the information is just coming at you from all different directions, and it's sometimes hard to figure that out. So
Yeah.
I'm feeling that, I want somebody who's gonna care about me, care about my life, care about the lives of others, and do all that they can to lead in a way that really cares about the people that have been impacted the most by this. And then, of course, a third major thing, this is not comprehensive, but the third major thing has just been especially the rhetoric, the really hostile and disparaging rhetoric that I've heard from a lot of senior leaders, particularly the president, but others, for people because of their race or gender or class. And you see such a tension. Our country is continuing to wrestle with how we move forward, and particularly better caring for and loving and elevating the voices, particularly of our Black and Brown brothers and sisters. And there is a total lack of leadership in being able to do that as well. And in fact, actually inflaming, from my view, some of those tensions, and not showing leadership in how to do it, or deferring to other leaders that it maybe have been doing this longer, or whose voices really are underrepresented in the current context. So I really appreciate a lot of the Christians, around me that I've been able to walk through some of this with and have good conversations about it. People in my own church community where we are willing to talk about how we better love each other, and how we really start to talk about these things, because it's critical.
Yeah.
But that kind of discussion is not, sometimes it's really hard to figure out how that can happen at a broader scale, because the current climate, there's a lack of leadership in facilitating a healthier climate around that. So those are three big things that come to mind for me, Jim. Most of those things are not new things, but they've been particularly distressing for me personally over the last 4 or so years.
Yeah. So yeah, big ticket items, climate change, the coronavirus, and how can we, as a diverse society, how can we all get along and help one another and love one another, as opposed to being divided, sliced up into little groups, and pitted against one another. So yeah, these are huge challenges, and as you say, they're, except for the pandemic, I mean, they're not new. Of course, the threat of a pandemic, we've always lived with that, but now it's 100 years since the last one, and okay, so we've gotten this pandemic, but health concerns, health threats have been with us our whole existence as a species, and we had been prepared for dealing with a pandemic, but obviously we have not done a very good job dealing with COVID-19. So it sounds like all these concerns would lend you to support Joe Biden. What do you think about Joe Biden, and where are you in terms of your support for Joe Biden?
Yeah, so in any election, I hope, I always endeavor to actually seriously understand who the candidates are, what they say they care about, and to understand also the way they act. So it's one thing to say that they believe something, but you can often know a lot about somebody by listening to what they say, what kind of, if they're on the record, what kinds of policies they choose to support. And it's clear from what I was just describing that I don't really have any strong motivation at all to vote for President Trump. And it really has even less to do with the fact that he's part of the Republican Party, and has really everything to do with who he is and what he stands for and what policies he has supported and not supported. His track record's obvious. So then turning to the nominee, Joe Biden, I've done some work to understand sort of the his positioning on certain policies and learning a little bit more about him personally, because as I mentioned before, most of my time actually in college and through the beginning of grad school, I lived during the, that part of my formation was under the President Obama's time in office. And so Joe Biden was vice president then. And so by that, you already start to get a sense by kind of listening to, him talk about things, the kinds of support that he lended to some of President Obama's priorities. You get a sense of who he is. And I know that he has a long tenure of service, and so it's not just the vice presidency, but he has an even longer track record. So even though I'm younger and I don't have a personal recollection of all of that history, it's not hard for me to go look and see sort of who he says he is and what he says he cares about. So some things that I really appreciate about him is that it does seem that he prioritizes or is intentional about being honest, about being compassionate, by listening to others, by trying as best as he can to act consistently. I know it's really challenging in the policy arena sometimes, especially when you've been in public office that long. Just like all of us, you like my experience in college, you hear people and maybe your worldview changes a little bit. Like, maybe you thought one thing, you get to talk with others and maybe it opens up your eyes to a different way of seeing things. And, so there's good ways to change positions on things, I think. And then there's other reasons why maybe you're stick true to certain things because they're part of your, core values. And so I've been appreciating the fact that I sense that Joe Biden endeavors to be authentic and consistent and evidence integrity. And I think for him, part of that is his own personal faith. It seems to be clear with the way that even in this last election season, the way that he's sort of described or integrated his faith into how he responds to people and how he thinks about issues. And as someone like me who's always trying to think about how my faith informs the work that I do every day, I think that's really valuable to hear someone else trying to do that same thing. And I tend to agree with, a lot of his positions on certain issues because I try to think about them thoughtfully and how can we better love people? How can we pursue, justice? How can we care for the vulnerable? And maybe even how we act boldly that might be in a different direction than we ever have before. But maybe it's necessary. For example, his climate plan. His climate plan has actually a pretty broad range of actors who, from moderates to maybe more progressives, but even people who are Republican, like Bob Inglis, former Congressman Bob Inglis. There's a lot of support for his climate plan and the fact that he's acknowledging that it's a problem, that people are largely responsible. It's serious, it's happening now, but there's a lot we can do. And so the fact that he's willing to engage it and show a range of different types of approaches is personally really encouraging to me because that's what we need. So I think there was someone who likened it to when JFK said, we're going to go to the moon. People thought, oh, sure, we're going to go to the moon, but we did go to the moon. So the idea is like, you think, oh, sure, we're going to get a real big, make a dent in this climate problem. Sure, we can make a big dent on this climate problem if we take it seriously. And by doing so, like what that is a perfect way to acknowledge, that this world is made by the Lord, that he called us to care for it, and that by doing so, boldly and with care and concern for those who are impacted the most, that is a very Christian thing to do. So I'm just encouraged that he's willing to propose that. And regardless of all the details, like maybe I prefer different policy solutions than he does, I think this is far and beyond pretty much any climate plan that we've seen proposed, at least in my recent memory. So I'm really encouraged by that. And I've never heard him personally like go out and disparage people, pick on people, give people nicknames, and use it as a tool to continue to be divisive. So if we are going to keep working on that, no person is going to be, it's not going to be a single person doing that. But I'm sure willing to support someone like Joe Biden, who's at least acknowledging there's a lot more we need to do here, and he's willing to be a bridge builder in that. And I feel confident and hopeful that with a Biden-Harris ticket, that I think that's more possible than it has been clearly in the last 4 years or so.
Yeah. So if you were to sum up your reasons for voting for Joe Biden, what would they be?
I trust Joe Biden to act with integrity. I think he seriously cares about engaging his work as a person of faith. I think he wants to take current issues seriously and is willing to work with others to do something about them. Particularly for me, that's around climate change and environmental issues. And I think he can be a bridge builder in larger discussions around how to heal divides. And I think those are all really important characteristics of who our next president needs to be and have.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And I'm so grateful, Rachel, that you joined us. Again, Rachel Lamb, currently living in Maryland, but born and raised in Michigan, speaking with us today. I'm Jim Ball, co-chair of Evangelicals for Biden, and thanks for listening and watching.